we're back live again. I hope everybody's had a great coffee break and took advantage of the networking sessions that are going on at the moment. Anita, thank you for joining us again before we move on to the India session. Now, Anita, this was your idea to follow the sun. Give us a little bit more background to that.
I would be thrilled to. And admittedly, I think I also put pressure on you not to wait another 60 days to do this, but to do this as soon as we could after April. I think the principle being, Jonathan, and that's why I love that you love the idea, that in Hospitality Tomorrow 1, we looked at the surface level, a macro view of the world of hospitality and where we are in the whole crisis journey and how do we respond. For Hospitality Tomorrow 2, it's about looking at it region by region by region so that the viewers can get the best value out of watching the program and really get a sense of depth of insight and exposure to the experts. So in terms of following the sun, it was being very merciful on people who might be asleep at the time that we might be covering one part of the world. So as Asia was awake, we're focusing on Asia. Asia starts winding down. We focus on Europe and the Middle East, with Africa having its own event by bench events in a few weeks' time. So we kept that separate. And then we go on to the Americas. So it's waiting for everyone to wake up and really get the best out of the event by literally following the sun.
Following the sun, I love it. And as you say, yeah, we're going to be doing Africa tomorrow, Sustain tomorrow, and real estate tomorrow, as well as we dive into different sectors and different regions of the world more specifically. For those of you who have joined us, we've got 1,057. It's growing as parts of the world wake up, or midday for some. And it's good to see on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see we've got our main stage, our breakout sessions, networking, if you want to do the 3-minute card exchange, and our expo, where we'll have sessions going on at various sponsor booths. And on the right-hand side, you've got the chat, the polls, the people. Great thing, Anita, on the people now is that we've got the ability to do video, one-on-one videos through people. So go in there. If there's someone you want to speak to, send them a link and you can have a separate discussion, which I think is fantastic. Now, we need to move on to our next session. Are you introducing our next session?
I'm going to leave it in your good hands and leave these lovely gentlemen with you, and I will see you back shortly. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Anita.
Take care.
All right. So now we're going to introduce our next 2-hour session. It's going to be all about India, Hospitality Tomorrow, India. And it was Puneet Chhatwal and Vijay Thacker who said, listen, we need to talk about India. So I'm delighted now to have this 2-hour session that's going to be emceed by Vijay Thacker. Vijay, please join us on stage. Vijay is the managing director of Horwath IHCL India. And also to join the stage is Puneet Chhatwal, who's the CEO of the Indian Hotels Company Limited. Puneet's been a great supporter of ours for many, many years, hosting wonderful receptions for us as we've launched events around the world. And Neeraj, Govil, thank you so much for joining us. It's going to be great to hear from you specifically as a global brand Marriott International Senior Vice President for South Asia on how you're coping with the current crisis as well. So Vijay, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you for putting the next 2 hours on. And I think with all your speakers on this session, we've got what, roughly 50% of the branded affiliated hotels in India speaking during the next
as long as they haven't transacted some more last night, that I don't know. But otherwise, yes, we've got at least 50% more of the chain affiliated hotels in India on stage over the next 2 hours. And you know, you couldn't have missed India as you followed the sun. I mean, we are 1/6 of the world's population, and fortunately, we haven't caused any health damage in any part of the world. With that kind of population size, the impact could have been very severe. It hasn't been in India. That doesn't mean the hotel sector hasn't been impacted. It has, because we are on 49th day of lockdown, very little business going on. Yeah, there's a little bit of economic activity that started, but travel is shut. A lot of the economy is shut. And therefore, the hotel sector is not in good shape. What we did do as Horwath HTL was to, we did a sentiment survey at the beginning of lockdown 1 in the end of March. And we felt that after about 6 weeks, almost on to 7 weeks now, we said, let's do a survey again and see what the sentiment is. The one important thing that came out of that was that in the first survey, there was a smaller percentage of the respondents, about 32%, that felt that the impact of COVID would be 6 to 12 months or longer. So it's about 68% that time who felt that we would manage it within 6 months' time. Now, after about 6 weeks of experience and thinking through, that number has doubled. So 64% of the respondents on our next survey, which we have completed yesterday, which we will release tomorrow morning. So 64% feel that the impact of COVID will last more than 6 to 12 months. In fact, out of that 64, 24% feel it'll go beyond 12 months. That's the survey, but let's hear from the two leaders we've got. Between Taj and Marriott, they cover more than 30% of the chain affiliated supply in India, and that's the best you can sort of have in terms of leadership to talk to you. Puneet, let me go with you. What is your sentiment? What do you think? As hopefully we open up more gradually over the next 2-3 weeks, we end lockdown 3 next week. Maybe things will start opening up a little bit more. How do you see the next few months panning out, short term, medium term, long term?
Thanks, Vijay. I think you said hopefully we open up, and we usually talk about it saying that hope is not a strategy. However, in times like this, I think hope is not just a strategy. I think it relates with all of us who have never seen some of the hotels touching zero revenue or being shut down. Had you asked me the same question on 11th or 12th of April, I would have said if we are 15-20% of the revenue of last year in the first quarter, we would be very blessed or fortunate. And if we were at around 30% for the first half, we would be even more fortunate. Having said that, actually what has happened is certain new areas, every crisis brings opportunities. So one of the opportunities that just came up out of nowhere is all this repatriation flights and 14 days quarantine. And, suddenly you start getting blocks like 100 rooms in Bangalore or another 100 rooms in Mumbai. So if I look into all this, coming from a very low base, coming from a extremely conservative estimate, I think the likelihood that we improve on our own estimates is far higher than going down further. So I think May has shown some positive green shoots, especially in the last 2-3 days, besides the need of accommodation for medical staff, doctors. And some real business is also beginning to come back in secondary markets, which we have noticed. And for us, one of the big areas there where we are seeing a lot of growth is level of Ginger brand. So that is beginning to turn around faster than I would say Vivanta or Taj, or I don't know if it's the nature of the market or it's just the kind of the business mix today. But does not matter which brand, it's encouraging and positive, and most of it has happened in the last 48 to 96 hours.
Okay, thank you. And I must say that before I move to Neeraj, I want to bring in one data point. I mean, I normally you would want to see a lot of data as part of this kind of a chat, but given the quality of data in terms of the abysmal numbers of occupancy and ADR that one would see for April and May, we all know that, so there was no point talking about that. But one good thing I want to point out is that before the repatriation demand came into play over the last 2 days that we talked about, my estimate is that there's about between 12,500 to 14,000 rooms in the chain affiliated rooms that are occupied at now, which is just shy of 10%. Between 8 to 10% of the total inventory is occupied. So that is real occupancy in a time when otherwise things are shut. Whatever the source of demand, that is real occupancy. And obviously that's being added to with all the repatriation flights and the quarantine needs for 14 days for each of those passengers. Neeraj, where do you see this being, did you see this being built upon further? How do you see the opening up and the next few months?
Thanks, Vijay. So I kind of concur with everything Puneet just said. Most of our, if you look across the portfolio today, the vast majority of our hotels are only partially operational. So we have about 30% of our portfolio across India that has temporarily suspended operations, and the rest of it is really only partially operational. And like you correctly pointed out, the actual number of available rooms are far lesser than what we would normally expect. So we are in very deep contingencies, basically in survival mode at the moment in most locations. The recovery phase will only commence when the impact of COVID-19 sort of begins to fade, when travel restrictions are eased, borders are opened up, and confidence in travel is reestablished to an extent. Now, if you look at India, India is in the eye of the storm. We all read the numbers. We know that the government is making every effort to contain the pandemic, but it is still spreading at a fairly large rate. I've read some reports that say that the peak of the pandemic is expected sometime around June, which I'm sure is the case. And I think any form of recovery can only begin post July. So from a July to September period, which is essentially that quarter, we expect our occupancies to grow from the single digits that they are today to probably around 20 to 30%. Now let's remember that given the volatility here and how uncertain things are, for every few steps we take in the right direction, we may end up taking a few steps back, right? There will be a very tentative approach to opening up the economy. There will be mistakes made. We're going to learn from them. We're going to correct them. I think it's fair to say that. It's logical to say that. And then there are the monsoons. This is the quarter when the monsoons typically slow us down anyway. There could be a second wave. So, it's going to be tentative. It's going to be small steps. And then we would see the occupancies sort of go to that 20 to 30% mark as an aggregated portfolio. And I think as we approach October and the last quarter of the year, calendar year, I think we'd see the occupancies to grow up from there on to about 50%. That is how we are looking at the business. I think today we are looking at some repatriation business in some of our hotels, much like some of the other hotels. We are looking at business continuity requests that had come in initially that are continuing to stay on at the hotel. We have travelers that have moved into some of the hotels from their homes in some locations. So we continue to see sporadic one-off businesses in place. The good news is we are starting to see, with the ease of restrictions now that have been announced, we're starting to see some form of recovery. And it's very, very minimal at this stage. But we've got a couple of requests from airlines who are looking to resume operations potentially from the end of May. And they're starting to talk to us about some of their requests as well. So that's how we see the recovery sort of play out between now and the end of this calendar year.
And what segments? And let me also make one request to both of you. Let's do this as a chat rather than as sort of a typical virtual panel question answer thing. So if you guys want to step in on to each other's comments, please feel free to do that. That'll give the best value to all of us. But let me just ask you, and whoever wants to take this, what are the segments that will come back first? I would imagine you will say that leisure, the international leisure, will come in the last. International business will obviously take time to come in as well. But what are the segments that you see hotels starting to receive sooner, and that will give you that 30% and then 50% occupancy?
Vijay, I think the opportunistic business is going to be the key. Like repatriation, we did not know where it came from. we didn't even realize that that could be a new market segment. Similarly, there'll be something else which will come up. That's number one. Number two, people will take domestic visits in maybe driving distance range to begin with. And of course, some corporate demand will come up once the airports start functioning. So if the flights resume towards the end of this month, if the airports open up, if the train stations start opening up more, and the highways, so step by step the demand will start coming back. Maybe not at the same pace, but I think these are the kind of segments. I think a lot of people might take vacations within the same city. We saw that before, pre-COVID, especially in Delhi. A lot of people were checking into our properties to spend an extended weekend because people are just fed up of being locked down inside their houses. And some of us saw the reports on the TV when they opened the liquor shops in Delhi. What happened? So imagine some others who are tied up in their cities and states. Once they open up, I'm sure they are going to drive wherever. Not, I'm just saying just to get liquor, but to be with their loved ones outside of their own homes, and that they're able to get out somewhere. So what that segment will be called, would we be calling it kind of a delight vacations, or are we going to call it a staycation, or are we going to call it some form of heavenly escape? Not a secret escape, I don't know that, but something like this will definitely come.
Okay, I mean, I think I agree with your about there are, for the international audience, there are several states in India where there's a prohibition on sale of liquor. I'm sure the residents there are rather thirsty, and they will drive into neighboring states whenever they can and quench their throats. So, Neeraj, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, so I broadly agree. I think the pivot is going to be towards the domestic customer, right? We're most of our business here in India is generated in India. 85% of our business here comes and is generated in India, and it's important that we build on that. So I agree. I think you're going to see drive-to locations attract first forms of business, be it essential business travel, followed obviously by people that are looking to basically let their hair down. People like Puneet, not people like me. But we hopefully want to see people get into cars, drive out to locations from major cities where they can spend some time with the family. Let me say that. I think that's going to be then followed by short haul flights, which are going to be in country technically. You may start to see, as international borders reopen, some short haul regional flights to other destinations as well. And I think people are going to make a beeline for brands and for locations that are able to demonstrate that they have got the situation under control and are taking all the necessary steps to make sure that the environment is safe for their customers. I think tier 2 locations, Vijay, will rebound probably more quickly. And I say that because manufacturing towns, places of worship is where I believe as they're beginning to open up, we'll start to see some footfall there. They rely very heavily on the domestic consumer. So we start to see some sort of movement there. But essentially, yeah, it's going to be drive-to locations, staycations, everything that we talked about, followed by short-haul flights, followed by international. And I think the pivot is going to be towards our domestic consumer across the board.
If I may add, Vijay, I think we should not underestimate the international travel. I don't know about the others, but once it opens up, I'm going to be the first one to board a flight back to Europe. You're cut off from your family for a long time. You've not been able to celebrate any occasion. You might want to take a little break with them. And there are a lot of people of Indian origin living all across the world. It's not a small number. It's a very, very big number, as we all know. And I think people, maybe less international visitors, coming in. But when it comes to what you call typically the OCI card holders, you will see a lot of movement in there because either they had to cancel, or the weddings were postponed, or they have not been able to go and visit the children. They're unsure, should the children come back to India or not during this phase? What will happen? Where will they go in the quarantine? Will the government put them somewhere, or will they choose a hotel? So there is a lot of that dissatisfied demand that is building up every day, as we're almost 50 days into this lockdown period. And another 10, 15 days, it's like more than 60 days, and people stop traveling almost 10, 15 days prior to this. So I think within the next 100 days, 120 days, there'll be a lot of possibilities for people to actually start traveling even internationally. Unless, let me put it this way, unless it was a challenge that if I flew from here to London or Frankfurt, I have to quarantine 14 days when I land there. And when I come back, it had to do the same thing here for another 14 days. That's the only question mark I would have. Then that kind of luxury of 28 days is not possible. But otherwise, there'll be a lot of people who would want to make these kind of travels or have this kind of short breaks even abroad.
I agree. I mean, the quarantine requirement is going to be the limiting factor in international travel. But just as, let's say, today the UK have not asked for the French coming into the UK to be quarantined. If there is some such solution that is worked out over the next few weeks, then obviously international travel will open up more. Neeraj, you want to add something there?
Look, I think the short haul travel will probably be the first approach. I agree. A lot of people, I want to go back. I want to be able to get on a plane and go see their loved ones. I think how governments decide to deal with that from a quarantine perspective will obviously determine the appetite for people to jump on that plane and go out and do it. But yes, there is going to be that segment as well. It's going to be one-time, two-time travel. But from a longer perspective, in terms of getting back to business, I think we're a long way off. 18 months at the very least before we get the confidence to get on an airplane and go from point A to point B, long haul.
Sure. And a lot of that will depend on the vaccine, and if at all a vaccine comes up, because there is some view that being an RNA virus, there may never be a vaccine for something like this, because there never has been a vaccine for RNA viruses. So we may just have to learn to live with it. Let's switch subject for a little bit, and this is something that's bothering me. I'm sure it's bothering a lot of owners and your owners and yourselves. With the kind of numbers and sentiment that we have talked about, and which I think is realistic as an outcome, certainly there is going to be a huge stress or strain, I would say, on debt service. As of now, the banks have only been granting a 3-month moratorium. Maybe RBI will relax that a little bit more. What will be happening to the industry if this situation were to continue for a long time, limited moratorium, 50% drop in revenue, or substantial drop in revenue, obviously no money left for debt service, where are we headed? I mean, it's the industry as a whole. It's not just one group or one developer that goes down, and therefore you have bankruptcy and a situation to be dealt with. Here you're going to have a slate of bankruptcies if it comes to that. So how do you deal with that?
So, Puneet, maybe I'll take a stab at this, and then as president of HAI, I can probably add a few other thoughts in terms of how you've been working with the government as well. But Vijay, the reality is, yes, rough run, and I think it is very, very important that we look at it in really 3 steps. First, when you talk about the long-term impact of this, especially on debt, it is important that the government consider giving a one-time waiver for businesses to go out and restructure. So refinancing of the business as a one-off, I think, is important. It will help take the pressure off from a long-term perspective. I think that's a very important ask that we've put forward, and hopefully that is under consideration. I believe that is critical to the long-term viability of these assets. Second, there is obviously the pressure on cash flows. And I think we need to be looking at some form of some soft working capital loans that are provided to the businesses so that they can sustain themselves over the medium term. And third and most importantly, something that is in our control as operators, largely in our control, is we need to really take a look at the medium to long-term prospects in demand, and we need to right-size our businesses, right? And what I mean by that is we need to go out, take a look at the long-term forecast that we're putting out now, and really look at the various elements within operations of these businesses. We need to make sure that we right-size our businesses to fit in with the next 18 months or 24 months, and then build it up from there on. So I think that's a three-pronged approach in three different phases that can address this concern. Tough ride for 12 to 18 months, some may argue even longer than that. Puneet?
So thanks, Neeraj. I think very well said, Neeraj, on what the operator can do and what the brand can do in creating that right size for what we are talking about in terms of expectations of the business. And if it comes back, you change the cost structure and adjust it accordingly. So I think that's a very good point. The other two have been kind of taken up, as Neeraj said, as the president of the Hotel Association. I would say we came to a unanimous decision, and we said we have asked for these 5-6 key things. Number one was a 12-month moratorium on all kind of principal and interest payments. Number two was subsidizing the labor cost. We asked for 50%, but if 50 was not doable, whatever was doable, in an ideal world, at least one-third could have been done, which means employer takes one-third, the employee has one-third cost to take, and the rest is subsidized by one-third. Why? Because a lot of jobs are at stake, not directly in the hotel business or tourism or aviation business. There are 4 to 6 indirect jobs that this sector creates in all other possible sectors. So I think it was for protecting the unemployment challenges that could come up. The third was that for the period of lockdown, some statutory obligations should not be kind of charged. For example, like in the UK, you should not pay property tax if the hotel has been shut down by the order of the government. Should not pay excise duty. You should not pay, certain other tourism charges and other lease license obligations which are beyond your control, because the event is it is under the Disaster Management Act. It is under a global pandemic. It has all the features of a force majeure, and those kind of rules should apply. The fourth was for the short-term liquidity and working capital. We had asked for a deferment of the GST payment. So as the business comes in, if the GST payments were to be made in 6 months from now, that portion of GST could be used by the businesses as working capital. And then the last not least, we thought this is an ideal time to push for the industry to be recognized as an industry. Today, it does not have the status as an industry. Once it's recognized as an industry, it gets cheaper debt, it gets cheaper utility services, whether it's electricity or other things, and finds a place in the constitution, which it has been struggling to find in the last 73 years. So I think this has been a consistent demand, unanimously agreed within the Executive Committee of Hotel Association of India, and also each member of that ExCom repeating on any forum or any panel that they have gone on. And that has been a very good effort. Whether it brings something, that we don't know, but I think some of this could be applied to any industry, not just hotel industry. It could be applied to any industry. And I think it would help, because the system will need the liquidity it needs. Now, whether it comes from RBI, it comes from government, it comes from private houses, it comes from a combination of all of the above. that kind of liquidity will be needed, not just in India, it's globally in every country. And as we know, many countries have announced it, although they're far richer than the Indian subcontinent.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's not just for the hotel sector; it's for all the industries. But certainly, as far as the hotel sector is concerned, because we are a very capital-intensive industry, where we see returns coming in over the longer term, value creation over the longer term, but certainly a lot of capital is invested at the start. If we do not get this kind of, one is the moratorium for 12 months, but certainly I would say that even a one-time restructure, because you don't know how long the impact of this is really going to be. I mean, you will open up, you may have, you will have a bit of back and forth for a while before you start settling down. And if it takes 12 to 18 months to really stabilize, then you really want a longer term debt structuring, restructuring to be able to debt service happening meaningfully. I must tell you that in our sentiment survey, one interesting result was 50% of people said they were able to get their moratorium. And this was just the one quarter, I think, moratorium, maybe two. I think one quarter. 50% said they were able to. 41% said they were not able to, or they were not eligible for it. Now I have to study that detail, but that tells you that there's a lot of people who are struggling on that moratorium issue. And also the fact that 50% went and got it means that's the amount of debt that's outstanding in the industry. It's thousands of crores. And for the foreign delegates, a crore is 10 million. So it's an Indian term. Crore is 10 billion. There's thousands of crores of debt out there. So that really is a challenge. Let me go to a different subject. And I know Neeraj talked about
the only thing, sorry, Vijay, sorry to interrupt.
Please.
I think the industry globally in phases has suffered from this kind of debt obligations. And it's an opportunity, despite that there is a crisis. One should also know how much debt you can actually service in a sustainable fashion. I think that's the key, because otherwise, the industry gets a bad name that this is high risk and you don't get the money back. I think we need to do something about that too. That long-term debt service is sustainable. Of course, things like this will happen, that you're out of business 6 months, 12 months. But even in a normal year, you have to be able to have a decent debt coverage ratio.
Yes, and I agree. There is some bad wood there that needs to be weeded out. But for that, we are sort of hurting the whole forest here, the whole green forest, which we should not allow that to happen. The owner-operator relationships. I think there's a lot of expectation that owner-operator relationships will get restructured, will undergo a change. What do you guys think about that? I mean, I think there is some scope, but there's a limited scope in some aspects. But you are the expert. What do you think is going to change? What can change? What can't?
So Vijay, I think our contractual agreements are an extension of our business models, right? That we operate. Today, when you look at it, we operate in India at least on a management agreement and franchise agreement, or management contracts and franchise agreement models that we have in the country. And our approach has been to really demonstrate strong operating results, on the back of sustained performance over years. So that fundamentally will not change. We are seeing some talk around extraordinary event clauses, around insurance clauses, around some aspects of FF&E. And I think as prudent and responsible operators, it is incumbent upon us in a crisis like this to take extraordinary decisions that I believe for the most part have done and will continue to do in these times. For example, providing a moratorium on FF&E for a period of time so that cash flow, can be conserved by the business is an example of that. So fundamentally, I don't see major changes. What I do see, for example, is a little more flexibility coming into play in some cases, especially when dealing with situations that are out of the norm like this. And I think as operators, it's incumbent upon us to relook at some of our fixed costs that we charge back to hotels and see how we can flex those and move them to a variable model, right? So that if the business takes a turn like it has now, those can be quickly scaled down. Our fees are generally linked to revenues and to profits. So fundamentally, I don't really see a major change to this. But I do see one thing emerging from this, which is over the last 3 months, I can tell you from an owner-operator perspective, we have been more aligned than we've been in a long time. And both of us understand, both parties and partners in this case understand that, we have to employ every possible means to ensure we get through this together, because both are suffering at this point. All stakeholders are in the business. So I don't fundamentally see major change. I do see more dialogue around flexibility on some of the matters that I pointed out.
So if I could add here, one thing is, I think that's a very global kind of an approach, and that works well for global brands, because you can't have a separate approach for every country or every region. It does not work that way. I think on the Asian continent, and especially within Asia, the Indian subcontinent, is the emotions play a very important role. And I personally feel the first and the foremost is to have some kind of a feeling for the owner, which we may not have had when everything is fine, in what the owner is going through, because maybe he's about to lose everything. It's not and it could happen to the best standing individual or the richest of people. I think having that empathy is the first thing the brands will have to learn to do. The second is, if there is any way you can help beyond the cutting of the FF&E reserve, because I don't think anybody is looking at the FF&E reserve only. They might be looking at fees, they might be looking at some form of subsidy to subsidize salaries, they might be looking at a loan, they might be looking at renegotiating the contract so that they are able to build the bridge in the survival phase to the revival phase, and might be happy to give you a higher fees or something else as a share in the upside going forward. The third very important thing is, there will be many owners who will try to, put some kind of shortcuts. And you might have had a very different perception of them before. So I think it will really bring out the kind of relationship you have and the character on both sides. Both the operator side and the owner side has to be dealt with in a very, very sensitive and a proper fashion. And last not least, I think this is one opportunity that can actually create new avenues of business, in which you might work with an owner and create different businesses out of it, because of this unknown situation that you all landed yourself in. So I don't know, maybe some owner is in car rental business. Maybe you can help him that he can, put his cars on rent in your properties, which you never wanted to do in the first place. And maybe we wanted to do that on our own, but we have no monies to now spare for these kind of businesses. We'd rather focus on that. So there are so many other things like shops, like all what we call within our brands, we call it ancillary businesses, that these ancillary businesses could be an opportunity for owners, as not all owners are sophisticated hotel owners. They are in other business, but they have a hotel too. So I don't think that definitely on the Indian subcontinent, there are a lot of sophisticated hotel owners who only deal with hotel real estate. So it's a good opportunity to work together, closer with the owner, build owner relationships, and be genuine, empathetic, and also expect the same from their side, no shortcuts, and have a very transparent, clear communication.
If I were to say, I think like you said, the dialogue has never been more aligned as compared to the past. I think there is everyone is looking for a customized solution. Everyone's problem is really their own unique problem, as Puneet pointed out. Everyone has their own set of, and the engagement is pretty heightened at this point in time. And the longer this drags on, the play will start changing as we go forward. So we have to find customized solutions. The example of the FFNE waiver was just one example I gave. There are, I know a number of brands have done a number of different things with the owner community. And the idea is really to see how we can support the business and ensure that the business survives. So we get to a stage where we can build on it and pad up. So number of initiatives being done across the board by different operators, but that is the need of the hour. And I understand absolutely that we need to continue dialogue. We need to be empathetic, but we also need to back that empathy with some solid action, right? And at the end of the day, it has to go hand in glove in terms of how we collaborate with our partners here, because we are partners for a long time. This is going to last for a certain period in time. Our relationships run much deeper and much longer, and potentially can take us to much larger distribution with these same owners.
Yes, I think I would agree with you all that we will probably need to break this into two parts. One is the immediate response and assistance over the next 2, 3, 4 months during the heat of this crisis. But then when you are looking at long-term structural changes, if any, then when you're in the heat of a crisis, that's probably not the best time to decide what is to be done. You need to go back and look at what works, what doesn't. Certainly, owners will want a greater say maybe in cash flow management and stuff like that, but we need to see how that works. The immediate complexity of this is over. Unfortunately, we have a lot of discussion topics, and with two great leaders like Puneet and Neeraj on screen, I could go on for another hour at the least. But the clock is run. I do have to, therefore, bring this to an end. I want to thank both of you for your very open, candid, and your message of what you see going forward. Cautious optimism is what I would call it. And I would probably like to end this session. What I did was that I approached Mr. PRS Oberoi, whom you all know is the senior most person doyen of the industry, to give me a message to be conveyed to all the delegates via this conference. And I'm going to quickly read it out. He says that the next 12 to 18 months will be very challenging for the Indian hospitality industry. We shall only see buoyancy in occupancy and rates commencing from the season from November 21. Now, mind you, that's from a perspective of Oberoi Hotels at their luxury level, mind you. But not necessarily only that way. He's looking at the industry as well. He says, we do not expect any improvement in international travel to India till late 2021, particularly for leisure travel. The Indian hospitality sector shall be concentrating on domestic tourism. An obvious market are Indians who travel abroad for holidays. They will not be able to do so and should be particularly targeted. Mr. Oberoi says that he has always been an optimist, that there is tremendous scope to grow business and tourism if we all work together. I think that's a powerful message. We need to work together. He's optimistic. There's a bright future that we can pull together and overcome the challenges of COVID. COVID is one, we've seen challenges before, and we shall overcome it. I'm sure from my side that there is a brighter tomorrow to come in due course. Maybe yes, maybe not. How soon? We don't know, but certainly there's a brighter future to come. With that, may I thank you, Puneet and Neeraj, for sparing your time. And I'm sure there'll be more questions that will come to us later, and to the extent we are willing to answer, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.